You're listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner, your source for investing made easy. Here's Andy Tanner.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner. This is where we do our very best to make investing simple. And boy, this is going to be a lot of fun. I've got a wonderful guest. He's written a book called The Art of Clear Thinking, a stealth fighter pilot's timeless rules for making tough decisions. And I'll start this way. I like to get right into things usually, but I think this deserves some great context. And why I'm so excited for this particular conversation. Unbeknownst to me, I thought when I embarked on a journey of investing and entrepreneurship and things like that, I thought it was an intellectual exercise in education. I'd want to learn how to do it. And that's certainly the case. But what surprised me is I didn't realize I was embarking on a journey of personal development. Life has a way of finding your weaknesses and pointing them out. And as I've studied, probably the number one investor I've studied is Warren Buffett. And his mentor, Benjamin Graham, wrote a book called The Intelligent Investor. And I realized it's a book on temperament more than it's a book on how to choose securities and how to do things like that. So today we're going to talk about the art of clear thinking, what it is, why it's elusive. And what excites me about the author of this book, his name is Hasard Lee. And I'm excited because when you can find someone who's been in much, much, much more extreme and difficult duress than I will ever be in my life, and learn how people do things under very difficult circumstances, I think it's great benefit. So with that rather lengthy background introduction, Hasard Lee, welcome to the podcast.
Well, Andy, thank you for having me on. It's great to hear what you're saying. And actually, The Intelligent Investor is one of my favorite books. I have it on my bookshelf right here. I just love learning different aspects. And, even though I'm a fighter pilot, learning about investing and learning how they thought, and especially Warren Buffett, like you said, he's great at being, strong during those tough times and holding. And, so that's definitely a great book. So appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
I think it is an interesting insight that people talk about his brilliance, and there's certainly no question about his brilliance, but I often believe that brilliance sometimes overshadows or takes attention away from just a solid temperament. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about your background. I can't imagine stealth fighters are cheap, and I can't imagine they just let anyone go out and get behind the cockpit of that type of equipment. So tell us a little bit about your background and the pathway, how difficult that is, and how'd you become who you are?
Yeah. So, for me, it started when I was 5 years old. I went to an air show, and this was back in the day when you could sit in the cockpit of these jets. So I sat in the cockpit of an F-16 and was just blown away. It was like sitting in the middle of a spaceship, hundreds of buttons. The seat reclined back 30 degrees. I didn't know at the time why, but it's to help with the G-forces. And I put a helmet on, looked like a bobblehead with just a 5-year-old kid. But after that, I was hooked. I knew that's what I wanted to do. As a kid, there's not a lot you can do if you want to be a fighter pilot. So I memorized all the facts, watched all the movies, of course, Top Gun. But it wasn't until I was a teenager that I really had a chance to fly for the first time, myself. And that was in a Cessna 152, which is essentially a flying lawnmower with wings. And, it's tight. It's cramped in there. It smells like fuel. There's no air conditioner. And this was in Los Alamos, New Mexico. So it's, we're at home of the Manhattan Project. So it's in the middle of the U.S., kind of secluded. It is on this plateau that it kind of looks like a James Bond layout for the runway. And so as soon as you take off, you are now going above a canyon. And so as soon as I took off, I was hooked. Like, it was just incredible to be able to control this aircraft left, right, up, down. I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so I applied for the Air Force Academy, which is one of the ways to become a fighter pilot. And actually got rejected the first time. So I was pretty excited about it. I got a letter back in the mail. And I should have known, because it's just a crisp white letter. They give you a packet if you actually get in. And so I took it down in my room, opened it, and it said, sorry, unfortunately, we don't have room for you. Good luck with your endeavors. And so I thought the dream was over then. But a few weeks later, I got another letter saying that, I was right on the cusp of making it in. If I went to this other school, prep school called New Mexico Military Institute, and did pretty well there, then they would let me in. And that's what I did. I went to New Mexico Military Institute, met the best instructor I've ever had, Ted Hitchcock. He was a colonel who worked at the Air Force Academy, and he retired as the department head of the history department. So then he went off to Roswell, New Mexico to teach for the next 30 years. So had a chance to learn from him, made it into the Air Force Academy. And then, after that, I got selected for pilot training, went to pilot training, did well there, got selected to fly the F-16. And from the F-16, went to Korea, served there for 2 years, went to South Carolina, deployed to Afghanistan, and then in 2017 got selected to fly the F-35. That's the newest supersonic stealth fighter from the Air Force. And like you said, it's not cheap. They're about $100 million a piece. And I had a chance to fly that, and have been flying that for the last 6 years. In 2020, I joined the reserves. So now I fly a couple times a month. And then the rest of the time I spend writing and doing some other things as well. So yeah, it's been an awesome career.
Wow. You mentioned Top Gun. I can't imagine, you watch a movie like that and they try to create the illusion of going fast, but I can't imagine when you're really up there that you even see the other guy. I mean, it's got to be just a blink of an eye and much, much faster. And then that goes. So that really is a great segue into what we're talking about is, what creates drama often is when we have, the bombs ticking and you got to cut the red wire, the blue wire, or, there's some type of, we're running out of time, and that adds a lot of pressure. And, there's a lot of stress. I had a conversation with a dear friend just last night that's going through extreme duress. The word dire straits is actually a naval term because you're trying to go through the straits and the water's rough, and can you make it through these straits? So let's talk a little bit about clear thinking. And I guess a great way to start is, what is clear thinking? What as opposed to, there's people who are very, very intelligent, but they might not be thinking clearly. So let's make some distinctions and talk a little about what it means to think clearly.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think to think clearly is one of the best compliments you can give somebody, more so than saying that they're intelligent. So it's not the information you have, it's what you can do with it. And so for me, that's developing a framework for how to make decisions. It's something that's really not taught in schools. And for fighter pilots, it's incredible that they're able to take somebody off the streets that have never flown before, and within a couple of years, 2-3 years, they're now flying combat missions on the other side of the world. And so having that framework for making decisions is something that you can always fall back on. I think in schools, a lot of it is convergent thinking. There's only one right answer. Think of like those Scantron multiple choice tests. There's only one answer to the question that you're asking, but life is messy. Life rarely has those clean answers. There's multiple variables. There's different trade-offs, different second and third order effects. So I think having a framework, and the one I discuss in the book is being able to assess, choose, and execute it. So it's called the ACE Helix. So being able to assess the problem in front of you. If you can't assess the problem in front of you, then you're never going to consistently make good decisions. After that, it's developing alternatives, developing solutions, and then choosing the correct course of action. And then finally, it's being able to execute, as you said, when you're having to cut the red wire, or for us, sometimes we'll be flying and there'll have been 1,000 people that have touched the mission. So everybody from spies on the ground to intelligence operators to tanker crews. So we refuel from an airborne tanker, which is essentially like an airliner hollowed out, filled with fuel. So they'll launch from different continents, all to refuel us multiple times, sometimes up to 10 times to get to the target. And, everybody's watching what you're doing. It's like being in one of those, joint operation centers in the movies where they're watching you. And if you screw up, then you're the last link and all of their work is for nothing. And if you're going after a high value target, you may never have a chance to go after that target again. So a lot of it is being able to be able to execute, to be able to find ways to not choke at the last minute. So when I think of clear thinking, it's being able to seamlessly go through that process.
Isn't it interesting how sound principles, things that a definition of sound principles might be things that are true in all cases, where often a dogmatist will take a principle and then apply it universally throughout all contexts, and it doesn't always work. But in this case, this is really a nice framework, this helix, to say, hey, I can apply this not only when I'm in a plane under difficult situations going really, really fast in aircraft, but I can do this. As investors, this happens all the time. I'm more of an investor than a trader. We teach people how to do both because people have different goals and they lean different ways. But it is interesting because the stock, if you're going to trade, what we call delta, which is change in the price, you have up, down, and sideways. And I think people don't realize that if they're going to delve in that type of activity, it's not your ability to predict the future. It's not the ability to know what it's going to do. That, in fact, it might be argued that the defining characteristic of all markets could be unpredictability. I mean, that could be very much a defining characteristic of it. So it's our ability to have 3 plans or 4 plans. If I have a plan for up and I have a plan for down, I have a plan for sideways, it's if I had 3 crystal balls I'm consulting and I have limited it to those 3. I do know it's going to be one of those 3. And like you say, you can have a plan, and that's as close as you're going to get to knowing the future, because one of them is likely to happen up, down, or sideways. So this is great stuff.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because, one of the themes of the book is really to have confidence in your ability as an expert. I think a lot of people, especially kind of corporate America, people working for large organizations, they don't like to think and hold themselves and the people around them accountable for critical thinking. They like to outsource the decisions to committees or to computer models or to consultants. And that's fine, but those are all just tools to help you ultimately make the right decision. So I think, I really advocate for everybody to think critically, to come up with something called the expected value, which is something that you guys are probably familiar with. What's the good that's going to happen? What's the probability of that happening? And then the risk, what's the bad? And what's the probability of that happening? So I really like to hold myself and other people accountable to finding the expected value that they think that a decision will hold before moving on to listening to other people, before, outsourcing the decision essentially to these committees, computer models, or consultants. Because I think, how many times do committees, completely screw up the decision, and then in retrospect, it's obvious. So I'm really an advocate for holding people accountable for critical thinking in that context.
Something, as I was listening to what you said, I had a memory flood my mind. When we're under duress, my brother's a first responder. He's a police officer. And when you have the opportunity to talk to people that just are under the most extreme circumstances, which is usually life or death, that's about as extreme as things get, when there's lots of lives or a life that's on the line. You say, well, how'd you get through all that chaos? There's bullets flying, there's a fire over here, and the baby over here needs to be saved, and everything's in chaos. More often than not, what people will say is, well, when that happens, my training kicked in, that I had practiced this, that we had a plan, that we'd had a procedure, and that kicked in. And it was interesting. We have a very global audience. I'd say that a third of our students are outside the United States, and they know I'm not bashful about, the gratitude I have for our country and those that serve it. I think this country I'm blessed to live in, is truly a land of opportunity. Despite the problems people want to talk about, I can get up in the morning and I can make decisions on what I want to do. So I'm always grateful. And one of the insights that I have on guys that have military training is that they do think clearly, and there's a steel in those guys. I was the worst basketball player in the history of my college by far. I couldn't jump, I couldn't shoot, but I could foul. So they found a way to pay for my school. But we were back, it's been 30 years ago, 1993 was my last year. And we were in the WAC back then, Utah. And we played Air Force. We played the Air Force Academy. And we'd go over there to Colorado. And I'm telling you, you could beat that team because we were just so much taller and athletic. I mean, we were going to win the game. But there's a difference that I tell people between being able to beat a team and being able to break a team. Most teams, we could go in and just break them mentally. You could just break them, and they just knew. Man, those were some of the toughest games I ever saw because those guys are freaking unbreakable. They will stick together. They will do their plan, and they're very difficult to get wins in Colorado, man. Very difficult at the academy. It's a cool arena. It's smaller, and it's got that feel of going into like you think.
Yeah, and altitude, I'm sure, gets a lot of teams.
Well, Utah's we kind of cheat because Utah's,
okay.
We're kind of both up. I don't know which one's higher. We're not quite a mile high, but I think we're close. But yeah, it's the point is when you have a plan, and you mentioned three things that I think if you want to be a trader, those three things you mentioned is reward, risk, and probabilities. What a fantastic formula, because as an option trader, if I'm going to add some option income and maybe write some covered calls to add to my stock, you get a dividend, you want to write a covered call too. The reward aspect is really important because some people just say, well, I just want to go make money. I just want to make money. Is the reward available in that trade or in that system you have? Does it get you where you want to go first? And then second of all, what are the risks? And then what are the probabilities of one or the other? And what is your contingency plan beforehand? Because when things go bad, you use the word accountability. And the plan keeps you accountable. Plans aren't perfect. People in the military lose their lives. It's one of the reasons we give them honor and respect. How do you deal with that idea? Is that just bravery? Is that just dedication? Because I tell people you can fail in business. It's not fatal. Luckily, you get to try again. You apply for the academy, don't get in, you get to try again. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think it just comes down to being a professional in what you're doing. So trying to be the best you can. There's a lot of studying that we do as fighter pilots. One aspect is how we debrief each sortie. So one of the sayings we have is you don't rise to the level of your expectation, you fall to the level of your preparation. And so there's a lot of little tricks that you can do to increase your performance a little bit, but ultimately it's about going out there and practicing what you're doing over and over so that when you actually go into combat or doing whatever you're doing for real, it's going to be easier. It's not going to be, it's going to be more difficult than you think. The fog and friction of war is very real. And, another saying we have is you lose 20 IQ points as soon as you put on the helmet. So what looks easy, in the office at 1G at 0 knots gets much more difficult when you're in the air and, you have people either shooting at you or you have closure rates a mile every 3 seconds when we're fighting an adversary. So it's significantly more difficult in combat. So you have to train harder in training. Then afterwards, we will spend, so these typical flights are about an hour to an hour and a half long for training. If we go into combat, sometimes we're doing 6-8 hours. Afterwards, we'll debrief for 2 to 6 hours. We'll go through every decision that we made, why we made it, and how we can do better the next time. And sometimes we'll listen to the same radio call 15 times to learn how we can do it better the next time. So if you ask any fighter pilot, what's the most important aspect to getting better and learning, it's the debrief. And there's a lot of different, best practices for that, because most people, we have an ego. We don't want to call ourselves out in the debrief. And so it takes strong leadership to hold themselves accountable, to be the first ones to call themselves out. And we have other techniques of, it's a sterile environment. We're not going after individuals. We're just going after, their actions. We're just trying to get better. It's nameless, rankless, faceless debrief. So I think being able to hold yourself accountable, to write down ultimately some lessons learned, to get better the next time so you're not making the same mistake is all you can do.
I'm always grateful to interview guys with military experience. I was interviewing a Blue Angel. They, fly those tight patterns in the air. The precision in which they fly is impressive. It blew me away. We do a podcast, and he's on point. Everything is in a row. Very, very that military lifestyle and that discipline comes through. 5 minutes after the podcast, he gives me a call. He says, "All right, let's debrief." How do we do on this podcast? What can we have done better? It was amazing that's the only time in all the podcasts I've done we ever debriefed. That was my first podcast debrief. Mm-hmm. But you said something that as I was listening to you, you said something that I think bears dwelling on for a moment. When you get into the cockpit, you lose 20 IQ points. And there's a real truth to when emotion rises and surges, intelligence diminishes. And the reason we invest is it's not to make money for the sake of making money. It's to have legacy for our children or to a charity we'd like to leave behind. It's to improve our lives. And, we're speaking with Hasard Lee, The Art of Clear Thinking, a stealth fighter, Pilot's Timeless Rules for Making Tough Decisions. This is not just a book this is a life book. There's not one area that this is in. And so if a person is in their marriage and emotions begin to boil, you can see that intelligences begin to leave the room. And often when we have a debrief that's severe in that realm, well, I was upset. I didn't really mean that. I said that because I was upset, right? Or, whether it's laughter or sorrow or fear. Can you talk a little bit about that? What do we know about that from a physiological standpoint? Why is it that when times get tough and emotions begin to rise, particularly fear, I think is a great one, or the need to be resilient when you've taken a hit is a really rough one. What's going on in our noggin? What do you know about that? What do they say in the military about that, if anything at all?
Yeah, so the Air Force has done quite a few studies on how stress impacts performance. And it really started in World War II when they were finding that good pilots were making simple mistakes in combat. And that's because as our stress rises, there's an optimal place, but once it goes above that, your IQ drops. And it's not, they're different aspects. So when flying, it has to do with situational awareness. 3D awareness is the first thing that starts to go. And that's really important for a fighter pilot. So if you get too much stress out there, then you start getting stupider. And I think, we all see that in our day-to-day lives when if you're getting nervous with public speaking, if you're in front of a crowd, you start feeling a little bit dumber. It's also why everybody else's problems look a lot easier than your own. So, it's a lot easier if a friend is in a relationship to give advice to them than when it's actually happening to yourself because you're getting hijacked by your emotions. So that's one of the biggest things that we have tried to emphasize over the last 5 to 10 years as fighter pilots is bringing in that human performance mindset of how to decrease that stress. And so we alluded to it earlier. The number one thing you can do is preparation. So there's some techniques that I'll give, but the number one thing is just to be comfortable in that environment, training yourself, pushing yourself so that when you actually get into, on the main stage that it's easy. But other than that, we do some like breathing exercises. So box breathing, 5 seconds in, hold 5 seconds, 5 seconds out, hold 5 seconds. That's actually real helpful for new students when they go to the tanker for the first time. So you're touching another aircraft going about 350 miles an hour. And up to that point in your career, you've been told never to hit another aircraft. And now you're intentionally doing it. So new students, they'll be just gripping the controls really tight. We've put heart rate monitors on them and their heart rates will get above 170 beats a minute. So it's almost like an all out sprint. So when your heart rate's that high, your fine motor skills are not that good. And you need really good fine motor skills when you're refueling because it's fully a manual maneuver. And so we'll do that breathing, actually trying to push out the tunnel vision. So tunnel vision is a very real thing. As you get stressed out, your vision shrinks. So you can only look through, it looks like a soda straw. And so actually trying to physically push out that vision is extremely helpful for regaining situational awareness of everything that's going on. So there's a couple different techniques to reduce that stress. Ideally, you're making decisions when you're not in a stressful position. If you have to, then just understanding your biases. So everybody's slightly different, but generally people are going to be a little bit more conservative when they feel like they're in a stressed position.
You used a term more than once in that segment of situational awareness and being aware of what's going on. And as I think about that, one of the things that takes practice, and I don't know, I'm certainly a work in progress still, is my own emotional awareness, and that's part of the situation. And one of the things that I've been very, very fortunate to have a really good marriage. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary, and people say, "Seems like you guys get along. What's the secret?" I go, "Well, it's her. She's patient. She deals with stress well, and you just get lucky, I think, a lot of the time." But if there is one thing beyond the luck that's helped us is, we try to become aware of when emotions start to rise or take over. And kind of the way we describe it is you can be in the snow globe where it's snowing on you, or you can be out and observe the snow globe. And the ability to do that as a trader and as an investor, as a father, as a coach, when you're coaching basketball, as a player, the ability to kind of get out of that snow globe and say, okay, observe our situation from hold it out here instead of being in it. It's been a huge thing. One of the things I've got written here is to talk a little bit about power laws. Do we have time for power laws?
Yeah, sure thing. So I go into being able to assess the problem in front of you. And as humans, you can only focus on a few variables. And so, the trick is prioritizing and understanding which variables to focus on. We, as humans, really have evolved to think linearly. If you walk 30 steps, you're now 30 steps away. But most variables in life are behave according to these power laws. And the three ones are exponential growth. I'm sure, your audience is very familiar with that, with compound interest. But it applies to a lot of other fields. For instance, when we're flying, if we have to eject, there's a whole bunch of things in the checklist, but the most important thing is just to slow down, because the force on your body increases exponentially as you speed up.
Wait, there's a checklist because when I visualize that movie in my mind of an ejection list, oh crap, boom, there's
sometimes, but a lot of times, you'll have a critical problem and you'll have until you run out of fuel to eject. So if your landing gear has issues or something like that, so there are times when you're out of control, you got to go. And, but there are other times when you have 30 minutes to eject, and you go through the checklist. So I fortunately haven't had to eject. If I had to, I think it would be pretty nerve wracking to know you're going to eject and to have 30 minutes to think through that scenario. So I'd probably prefer to just have to punch out, but the force on your body really matters. And going Mach 1.6, for instance, it's 300 times the force on your body if you stick your hand out the car window going 70 miles an hour. So it'll just rip you to shreds. Yeah. So it's really important to be able to understand those different power laws. Another one is the law of diminishing return. So we're all familiar, I think, with working out. After a couple of years doing the same workout, you're going to stop gaining as much as you did initially. And then the last one is a long tail power law. That's kind of Pareto's 80-20 principle. So that applies in a lot of different circumstances. But being able to find the variables that adhere to these power laws, and then finding what are called the knees in the curve. So I walk through an example in the book of, it's like extreme compound interest. If you find a penny and it doubles every day for 31 days, how much are you going to have? Most people say a couple $100. If you're familiar with power laws, you might say a couple $100,000. It's really $10 million after 31 days. But the knee in the curve, I think, a lot of people aren't familiar with. And that's if that penny doubled every day for just 20 days instead of 31 days, it would be only $20,000. So that day 20 is that knee in the curve where everything takes off. So finding those knees in the curve are critical to understanding, what's going to affect the system the most when you're trying to observe it. So those three power laws, there's actually, a couple more, but those three will encompass about, 95% of the problems you encounter.
My sense is that the more our audience listens to you, the more excited they're going to be to go to Amazon.com and pick up a copy of The Art of Clear Thinking, a
Yeah. And
stealth fighter pilot's timeless rules for making tough decisions. And the thing that makes this notion attractive to me is often when I speak with guys like you, I kind of have an idea of the gap that exists of where I'm currently am in my progress and where I could go in the next level. And there's opportunities to fill that gap through education. And the way I always sell books the same way when I sell books, it's pretty simple. Is I say, look, let's say you had a chance to go have go have dinner or drinks or have a glass of scotch or whatever with Hasard Lee. Would you take that opportunity? And would you pick up the tab at the end of dinner if you got to pick a fighter pilot's brain for a while? I'll tell you, the effort that people put in, I've written a couple of books, and the effort you put in to write a book is a lot more deliberate and a lot more thorough than preparing for a conversation over dinner. And it's an incredible way to pick a person's brain is to read what they wrote and really observe what it is they wrote. What did the author say? Not what my opinion was, not what I carried coming into the book, but to set that aside and say, what did the author really say about situational awareness, about having a plan, about intelligence going down when emotions rise? The last thing that I have a note here that I'd like to have you touch on is the idea of stress being calming. I don't know. I'm really interested to see how you might articulate the idea of stress being calming. I've experienced that a couple times in my life, but I don't know how to explain it to people. A couple examples. One time I was on a business trip and I got held by gunpoint. And it was weird looking down the business end of that pistol and having a guy who was going to rob you, and I felt just an amazing confidence and calm, even though I'm sure my eyes dilated and my spine tingled. I'm sure all of those physiological things were happening in my body, but I was calm. When COVID hit, the biggest stress I felt was, I did a webinar and my system holds like 10,000 people at a time, and it broke. I mean, people couldn't get in. They were so afraid of what was happening to the markets and the plunges. All of a sudden, it's really interesting how people want education in the market slide and they're not as interested when the market's not sliding. But I felt a burden. I thought, wow, these people are looking to me for leadership. And there was a bit of a stress there because I thought, I'll be fine, but there's people hanging on every word here. And I just felt preparation and experience. And I just Andy, you were built for this moment. Your 30 years of doing this has built you to be in this place at this time to help these people. And I'll tell you, the best trades, it's so fascinating because COVID's the fastest drop we've ever had in that amount of time. A third of the market gone in less than a month. I mean, it was just phenomenal. Some of the best investments and deals I ever picked up, ever, like the best ever, were boom, let's go. COVID's not going to be forever. Here's the principles. Warren Buffett calls this the shooting the fish in a barrel experience. When you have incredibly powerful companies that all go on sale at the same time, where do you get that in negotiated contracts? When the market's liquid and it's fallen, you never get to negotiate prices that low. You couldn't sit down with Warren Buffett and say, I want to buy Geico Insurance or Duracell battery and get a deal like that ever. So I don't know how to explain it. I mean, those are a couple of experiences I can cite where I've felt calm in stress, but I'd like you to finish with talking on that because part of the clear thinking is cool under pressure.
Right. So I think it has to do with having a game plan and sticking to it. So to your point, the blood in the streets, that's the best time to invest. I've had a couple of times where, I've come close to dying. One that I talk about in the book is when I was a new student, I was dogfighting against one of the most experienced instructors out of Luke Air Force Base at the time. And so We were doing what's called high aspect BFM, high aspect dogfighting, where you're pointing at each other, closure rates over 1,000 miles an hour. And there are different maneuvers we can do, and we have different airspeeds associated with those different maneuvers. And I made the wrong decision, and I decided to go up vertically. It's almost like a loop to match him. And I was just 7 knots too slow, about 10 miles an hour too slow. And I ended up running out of airspeed as my nose was pointed straight up. So I was hovering there for a second, and then I started sliding back. So I was going backwards in the F-16, which is something it wasn't designed to do. The nose snapped forward, negative 2.4 Gs. Everything shot up to the top of the canopy. I was being lifted off the seat with over 500 pounds of force, and the jet went out of control. And so I was able to eventually regain it. But the interesting thing is, every time something like this has happened, there hasn't been any fear, and that's not some sort of like macho thing. It's just everything, all the background thoughts go away. There's, a few things that we can do, meditate, stuff like that to help be able to focus a little bit better, but never, for me at least, does it go to zero. And these few instances where, it's been a life and death situation, everything has gone to zero other than how to get out of that situation. And it's actually a really interesting feeling. I wish I could kind of snap my fingers and go back to it, because you're so focused on the problem at hand. And for me, it was going through, we have a checklist. If you go out of control, you have to memorize it because you're not going to have time to reference it. But I went through the checklist of how to recover the jet, and it worked. But, I think having a game plan, I think that's probably the most important thing. If you don't have a plan, then that's where you kind of just are buffeted by those emotions. And I would guess investing is the same thing. If you have a game plan, you have a trigger for when you're going to invest. If the market goes down 20% and you execute on it, I think that's the way to do it. So thinking beforehand of how you're going to execute that plan, and then holding yourself accountable when actually is the best way to do that.
We call it the investing blueprint. It's very similar. Boy, I can't thank you enough for your time. It is really an honor, and I just feel to express gratitude for the chance to have a few moments with you. Obviously, I'm sure I join so many people in thanking you for the service that you give to your country, both in the past and currently getting up a couple times a month flying. It's a great place to live, and I get up in the morning today and I get to do whatever I want to do. And I get that because people preserve that opportunity for me by doing a lot of training. For those of you that are listening, what an amazing opportunity. The good news is this. There's not a pill you can go buy to take and get the right kind of calmness. I guess there's, Valium and things like that. But what an opportunity to take some time and spend some time with Hasard Lee in his book, The Art of Clear Thinking, a Stealth Fighter Pilot's Timeless Rules for making tough decisions. And what an opportunity to increase that skill within our lives. Any chance we get Congress to read your book?
I've had politicians, senior Air Force leaders all reach out. So, and I've been really surprised that a lot of Wall Street firms have reached out. A lot of tech companies have reached out, because it is a business book. And so it got picked up by the Wall Street Journal as the #2 best-selling business book in the country. So I've been just blown away at that, and how it's, I think it's providing value to those people. And it's not just fighter pilot stories. It's really applying those principles so that doctors, lawyers, teachers, anybody out there, I think, can apply. As going to the beginning of our conversation, it's, there's some key principles that, go through all jobs out there. And one is, handling stress. Another is being able to come up with decisions and come up with the right decisions. So I think it's a universal book, and I'm just fortunate that it's really resonating with people.
I get excited. I spend a lot of times in business investing in the podcast context, but at the end of the day, or really at the beginning of the day, I think it'd be a better way to say it, is husband and father are the two badges that I like to wear. They're the hats I like to put on every day. And I just think about so much of our happiness and our sorrow comes from how we relate to the people in our lives. That's a source of great joy and a source of great sadness for many. And as I think about these principles of stress when you're interacting with other people as a team. If you can get, the guys that I think the most elite teams on planet Earth are the Navy SEALs, because those guys in their training, as I watch it from afar, having, no authority to speak on it, having not gone through it, but watching it from afar, it almost seems like their plan is to break a guy down to where he says, okay, I need this guy and I need this guy, and I will go through this for them. They're depending on me. I'll go through this for them. And so having a team that, one thing to stay calm as an individual, but when you can get your family, when you can get your wife and your boys on board, and you have these skills as a team, you become a high performance family. And, I look at my team at the Cashflow Academy, talk about a high performance team, and those guys are just pros. They just, amateurs create problems and professionals solve problems. And those guys are just cockeyed pros. So I'm so grateful. I'll give you the last word. A lot of stress going on in people's life. Things like AI make people nervous. There's a whole, like the internet was a whole new thing to learn and deal with. AI is going to be a really big change for us and our kids. There's a lot of political division in the world right now. I mean, there's a feeling post-COVID, at least I've had in my life, where things are a little bit more turbulent than it seems like. I grew up in the 80s. It was pretty nice. You had some hair bands and it's pretty fun. There wasn't a lot of stress, but now it seems to be. I'll give you the last word for listeners. What are your parting thoughts?
Yeah, I think just finding a way to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because you're right, there's a lot of change, but as we talked to earlier, change always presents some sort of opportunity. So I think there's a lot of change going on. Technology is really leveraging everything we're doing. It's something that we've experienced over the last 50 years flying fighters. I'm sitting in a suit of technology that allows me to do thousands of times more stuff than I could do on my own. I could go supersonic. I can carry, tens of thousands of pounds. I couldn't do that on my own. So this technology is making me better. And I think we're all experiencing that. The computer, the phone that you have in your pocket, your computer, all adds leverage to what you're doing. And, I was just out in Silicon Valley a couple weeks ago, and there's a big contingent of them that think the next billion-dollar company is going to be run by 3 or fewer people. So, and that's due to AI. So it's going to be an AI company. So yeah, each of those 3 people, their decisions are going to be, hugely leveraged. So I think it's something that is affecting all of us, and it's not a bad thing. It's, change, there's opportunity. You're just going to have to change yourself. And so just getting comfortable being uncomfortable is the way to handle that.
We've had the opportunity and the benefit of listening to Hasard Lee. His book is The Art of Clear Thinking, a Stealth Fighter Pilot's Timeless Rules for Making Tough Decisions. His website is Hasard Lee, and that's with an S, hasardlee.com. Congratulations on the best-selling book. And I can't imagine how it would happen, but if in your comings and goings, you think, well, maybe Andy could give value to my life, I hope you'll reach out and let me return the favor. You've been listening to the Cashflow Academy podcast. This is where we do our very best to make investing concepts simple. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Cashflow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner. For more information on investing made easy, go to thecashflowacademy.com.